All right, we're going to go over Chapter 5 today. I did send you this, two things, last week. We're going to actually look a little bit at this W3 Schools JavaScript HTML DOM tutorial. And there's a couple other ones in there. You can take a look at them if you're interested. And also, I sent you the study guide for Chapter 5. So we'll go over that by the end of class, too. All right, so I am on page 289, Chapter 5, working with the document object model, also known as the DOM, and DHTML. All right. In this chapter, as you can see, we've got several objectives. I don't want to sit and read them to you, but the idea is what the DOM allows is interactivity in JavaScript. When you take your next test in here, which will be in about 2 weeks, I don't know exactly when. We're going to go over Chapter 5 today. If we get through everything, great. We're going to go through some examples tomorrow, and Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday will all be lab. Next week, Monday, we will go over Chapter 6, which is on forms and form validation using JavaScript. Again, on Tuesday, we will go over some examples for part of the period, and the rest will be lab. Wednesday will be lab for the entire period. No class, of course, next week, Thursday or Friday, because of Thanksgiving. Then when you come back, you'll have probably 2 days, again, of lab. And then that Wednesday, we will take the hands-on test for Chapters 5 and 6. All right. Now, one thing to realize, hopefully this is all going to start coming together for you. But we talked about this a long, long time ago, that when we were talking about working with CSS, and you wanted, if you said something like ID equals hello, stupid name, but you get the idea. Then in your CSS, you had to put in what? # hello, right? Everybody remember that? Because you're going to start using that again now. And if you said class equals hello, then you had to say dot hello. All right, that's really going to become important in this chapter and in Chapter 12 when we start talking about things like selectors. But they will talk again in here about IDs, tag names, class names, and selectors. All right, so we will talk about all that stuff in here. Kind of a weird thing when you look at some of these properties. When you are working with CSS properties in JavaScript, you've got to make some changes. Just so you know that. For instance, when we set the font family in CSS, you go like this. Font-family. That doesn't work when you're using JavaScript. JavaScript thinks you're trying to take a variable that's named font and subtract from it a variable named family. And it doesn't understand. So instead of writing it like this, you'll end up writing it like this. And it's got to be a capital F. May not sound like a big thing, but again, if you want your stuff to work, there are certain things you're going to have to do. All right. And we'll talk about the window object, how you can open up new windows, what you can do with new windows, etc. All right. Then we'll talk about timeouts and intervals. I'll get to that when we get to that point. Talk about different objects that are available to you in the browser. The history object, if you want to be able to go back to pages. The location object, to know right where you are. The navigation object. You may or may not have heard of this term before, but probably a good 10, 15 years ago, somebody came up with the bright idea that, hey, anytime anybody goes onto our website, we can use JavaScript to find out exactly the browser that they're using, exactly the operating system that they're using, etc. All right, and that was done through something that's called browser sniffing. All right, it never really quite caught on the way people thought it would. And it's not that it's not used today, but it's not used very much today. We'll talk about that. All right. There are, again, a lot of exercises in this particular chapter. And these exercises will talk about both something that's called the DOM and something that's called the BOM. All right. And you're going to see this in a picture in just a couple pages. But if you look here, because I'm telling you, because this is a question on the test, and that is this thing that's right here, come on, right now, give me a break, that's called the BOM, is also known as the client-side object model. All right, so there's a question on the test that says something like the client-side object model is also known as, and it's the BOM. All right, the DOM, the document object model, is part, sounds weird to say it like this, the DOM is part of the BOM. All right, and again, you'll see this when we look at the picture in just a couple minutes. But the idea, again, is when you want to go in and be able to add interactivity. One example is what they show here on page 290 with this photo gallery. There are a lot of ways that you can add photo galleries. And to be honest with you, JavaScript is probably not the best way because you have to write code. What we'll get to in Chapter 12 when we talk about using Jquery is you can do the same kind of thing by using what's called a plugin and just literally putting in one line of code that says turn this on. All right, as opposed to you having to write a lot of code. All right, on the bottom part of page 291, the author says here, again, that's what I told you. The browser object model, the BOM, is also known as the client object model. As it says, it describes the relationships between objects in a web browser. What's an object? Basically, it's anything on a web page is looked at as being an object. And anything that's on a web page, you can write code or you can do things so that you're able to make anything on a web page react. All right, so you want a certain word to appear in a different color. You can do that. All right, if a user clicks something, you might want X to happen, and if they don't click it, you might want Y to happen. That kind of thing. That's all the interactivity. So these objects, as mentioned here and as shown on page 292, they're shown in a hierarchy. This is what it looks like. This is the BOM, literally. And what we care the most about in this chapter is the thing way on the right. All right? And that's the DOM. So this is the browser object model. Part of the browser object model is the document object model. We will talk a little bit about the screen object, the navigator object, the location object, and the history object. And it's not that they're not important, but they're not as important as the document object model. All right? That's what allows the true interactivity to take place. So as it says, the top level is the window object. You may or may not realize this, but you've already used it. You've used prompt before. I think you'd all agree with that. Everybody has used prompt. Prompt is one of the things that's available to you directly under the window object. How do I know that? Because instead of just saying prompt like we've been doing, like prompt enter your age or whatever, you can say window.prompt. But because the prompt method is part of the window object, you don't have to say window dot. You can, all right, but it's just extra typing that you really don't have to do. The window object, as mentioned there, is also called the global object. And this is referred to as a hierarchy because it is, literally. The document object, the screen object, the navigator object, the location object, and the history object are all children of the window object. That's literally how you refer to it. If you had a child here of the document object, it would be a child of the document object and a grandchild of the window object. Most of the time, you don't go to the length of saying, does that mean this is an uncle or an aunt? Some books actually do that. They go to that much, they're that specific, but normally you don't see it like that. All right, so again, most of the stuff in this chapter starts on page 292 talking about the document object model. It's almost always called the DOM. All right, and I just noticed this. This must be Tony's favorite page in this whole book because it says Go Patriots on that page. All right. So as it says, the DOM is the most important object. As it says, it represents the web page. The document is the web page. Again, whether you realize it or not, you've used this before. You've done document.write, which means write something right onto the web page. So you have used it before. But there's a whole heck of a lot more that you can do, all right, with the document object model. We'll learn a lot of it in this chapter. All right, so it says the document object contains all the elements you create on the web page. In this book, objects in the browser model have uppercase, etc. But the point is, you know this already. Document.write, it's a little d. That's what you should be using. All right. Typically, it's called the DOM, all right, not the document object model, but they're both correct. And as mentioned, what the DOM allows you to do is to create what's called dynamic HTML, DHTML, which means interactivity in a website. My guess is everybody in this room at one time or another, you've gone out to a website where it's brought up a form or it's asked you a question or something else. You've answered it and possibly something on the page changed. All right, you could do something, not a great example maybe, but as an example, you could do something like ask the user, hey, what's your favorite color? And they say green. Boom, the background color of the screen becomes green. What's your second favorite color? You say gold, and boom, now the text is gold. All right, as an example, that would be interactivity. All right. The DOM, as it says, is what allows JavaScript to make changes in HTML and CSS. The DOM is an example of an API. You may or you may not have heard of that term before. API stands for Application Program Interface. All right, and I actually have brought this up to you before, but I'm going to say it again. I look at an API as kind of being like a contract. All right, and it's a contract between you and the software, where the software says, I'm going to provide this stuff for you, but in return, you have to use it the way I'm telling you to use it. And as long as you abide by it, it'll abide by it. And that way, the reason I say it's like a contract, you know, if I came in here and if I stopped shaving, it's hard to tell anyway, but if I stopped shaving or let my neck grow and let my hair, no, that wouldn't happen. But if it was something like that, sooner or later, someone at Rankin would come talk to me because I'm violating the rules of the contract that I signed when I took the job here. All right, and that's kind of what an API is. So as it says here, the DOM represents the HTML of a web page that's displayed in a browser. The good news is you don't have to create the DOM. It's automatically created for you when you create a web page. It looks a little bit funky if you've never seen it before. Now on the bottom of page 293, they start to show you here some HTML. Oh, that's another thing that this is another question on the test. The DOM hierarchy is also known as the DOM tree. It's another question on the test. All right. But if you had something like this, where you started to create some HTML, there's nothing in there that you haven't already seen. We don't have the doc type tag, but you get all the other stuff that's in there. And here's some more HTML on the top of the next page. But what you probably have never seen before is this. And this is what the author is showing on the bottom half of page 294. This is an example of what's referred to as a DOM tree. And you'll notice everything, the document is the root. All right, it's the only thing that doesn't have a parent. Technically it does, it has the window, but what we're looking at here, it's the only thing that doesn't have a parent. So what's under the document? Well, that's that HTML tag that we created right there. What's under that HTML tag that we created? Two other tags, a head tag and a body tag. What's under that head tag? A meta tag and a title tag. What's under the meta tag? Something that says char set. What's under the title tag? Something that says photo gallery. So what you have here is you've got what are referred to, each one of these things in their own way is typically referred to as a node, N-O-D-E. And you can do different things with nodes. You can add nodes, you can remove nodes, You can move nodes around. You can do what's called clone nodes, where you make a copy of a node. That's just some of the stuff that you can do with this. All right. Now you'll notice that much of the stuff here, for whatever reason, when the author put it in, they put it in yellow or kind of a brownish. These right here, those are known as text nodes. And they're at the bottom of the hierarchy because they can't have children. So in other words, this can't have a child, this can't have a child, this can't have a child. You'll notice that the other things that are up here, what's meta, what's title, those are tags and or they're attributes. All right, so they're attributes of the DOM. Just in the same way, you know, you all have attributes. I have attributes. I have a height. I have a weight. If my height is 72 for 72 inches, that's the value. So that would be this. The actual height itself would be something that's up here. All right? And do I expect that to totally make sense? No. But what you are able to do with this stuff is while the program is running, this is the most important part of the entire lecture. While the program is running, all right, you can dynamically add things to a web page using the DOM. That's the most important thing. So while the program's running, you can change colors, you can change fonts, you can add content, you can change content, you can remove content. That's the big thing about using the DOM. All right. As it says in the figure we just saw, the HTML elements are arranged in what's called a hierarchy. Another question on the test. Each item on the DOM tree is known as a node. I already mentioned that to you. All right, but it's another question that's on the test. All right. So when you start working with a document object model, there's a bunch of things that you can use with it. Some of these things, not all of them, but some of these things that you can use with them are shown in this table that's on the middle of page 295. And please notice if you look right here. Let's look at the first one. I've said this to you already, but notice it's singular, get element with no S on the end. That means you only return a single element that matches that ID. On the other hand, when you look, get elements by class name, get elements by name, get elements by tag name. Those next three all have an S in there. So they return what's called a collection of elements. So if I asked for everything that was in there that had a class of hello, all right, and if I had hello for set up for a paragraph and an unordered list and something else, all those would be returned. All right. If I do a get element by name, okay, I could check for all p tags, for example, and I get every paragraph back. All right. I could do it by name or by tag name. The other thing is if you look up here, this says query selector all. All means return every one. There's another one that they're not showing in here that's just called query selector. That only returns one. The first one it finds. But query selector all returns all that match the criteria that you're putting in. So again, notice, returns a collection, returns a collection, returns a collection. All right? And we've already worked with document.write, so that's no biggie. Some of the properties that are involved in this, all right, again, notice it says it has properties that can be used to manipulate these objects. This is not this table on the top of page 296. This is not, repeat again, this is not a complete list. Not at all. All right? But these are some of the things that you can, for lack of better words, check with. All right? So, accessing document elements, content, properties, and attributes. Some of these we've already talked about. You've already seen this. If I write a web page and I put in here input type equal number, ID equals zip. All right, if I put that in there, then I'm able to go in and use the get element by ID and the ID I should be searching for is zip. Does that make sense? You're going to do this on your next test, so it sure as heck better make sense. All right. So once you do that, then you can come in and do something like this. var zip field equals document.getElementById zip. All right. Now, you may have heard of things like this. You may have seen things like this, etc. I remember years ago when I was living in, I think it was in Woodridge, Illinois. For some reason, I was getting calls all the time. I mean, sometimes 2 or 3 a night. It was from telemarketers. I don't know how I got on the list by them or for them, but I did. All right. I even tried to get off the list, but then I got more calls, which didn't make any sense. But the point is, what they did after a while, they would ask me my name. I very rarely, if ever, give it to them. But they'd ask me my zip code. Okay? I'd give them my zip code, and I can't remember what that was at the time. But they'd say, oh, Woodridge, Illinois, correct? And how did they do that? Because they had some kind of a lookup, right? And what they were able to do on their screen was as soon as they typed in, let's just say it was 55555. As soon as they typed that in and moved off that field, boom, it filled in the city, and boom, it filled in the state. That was all done dynamically. All right, so there had to be some programming in there to do that, but once it was done, you could do that dynamically. The mention in here, make sure when you do this, the E in element, the B in by, and the I in ID are capitalized. Everything else is not. I have seen people do this before, even after being told this, where they put in get element by ID and they make the D capitalized. Then it doesn't work, and for the life of them, they can't figure out why. All right? So you're going to be working on this project in here. All right, and they show, it says you're going to be working with this photo gallery application. And it's on 297, and it's on 298, and the top of 299. As always, it's not my intention to come in here and go over any of that stuff. That's what you're going to be doing. Sometimes it's not enough to get one element. So notice it says there, get elements by tag name. I said this before, but there's an S there. So you are conceivably getting multiple elements. This says return all paragraphs on the page. Does that make sense? If there are none, all right, it'll be an empty collection. If there are 15 paragraphs on the page, it'll return all 15. And now, once you've done that, if you would want to, you know how to use things like JavaScript for loops, where you could iterate through that collection and print out each one of the 15 paragraphs, if you wanted to do that. Notice they say be sure not to include the brackets, so this is a P tag. Don't put bracket P bracket here, or it won't work. Another question on the test. All right, they ask what an HTML collection is. I think this is one of the ones at the end in the definitions. An HTML collection is an indexed collection of HTML elements. Again, this shouldn't be rocket science because why? HTML collection is a collection. All right. I don't remember if node list is on there directly or not. I think it is. A node list is an indexed collection of nodes. So in other words, a node list has something in it. A node list has something in it that allows you to work your way through it. And what I mean when they say it's an index collection of nodes, each node has a number associated with it. It's not like they're just thrown up there. All right? An index collection means that the collection has a sense of order. It's like an array. It's not an array, but it's like an array. And what's nice about it is you can use some of the same stuff you'll learn how to use for arrays. You can use on these node lists. Things like iterating through it with a for loop. All right, and you'll see some of that as we go on in here. And the author mentions that it says they're not actually arrays. That means you can't use things like array.length, arrayname.length, because it's not an array. All right? So some of the array methods you cannot use. Many of the array methods you cannot use. Now this looks pretty ugly. Document.getElementsByTagName h1 1. Well, that says, what do I want? This right here would say, give me all of the h1 elements. But since we put put a 1 after that, no dot, but we put a 1 there in brackets, remember we start with 0, so that's going to give us the second element. That will give us the second h1 tag. There is a question on the test that asks you something along the lines of, how would you reference the second one? And if you know this, you'll be fine for that question. Again, then there's more stuff in here. Now, take a look at what this says. It says to add an event listener using the getElementsByTagName. All right? What an event listener means is, and this is not on a test, but it's a question that if you go in for a job, all right, I don't care if it's web or if it's straight programming, you might be asked what an event is. So look at it this way. Your program's running. I don't care if it's a regular program, a web page, or whatever. The program is sitting there waiting for you to do something so that it can react. It might be clicking a button. You know, it might be choosing something. I don't know. But the program reacts after you do what it wants you to do. All right? What that means is the program is sitting there waiting for an event to happen. It is listening for an event to happen so it can react to that event. All right, so you will go through an example of this on pages 300 and 301. All right, then on 301, they talk about accessing elements by class name. The previous one was tag name, so that would show you all of your p tags, all of your li tags, all of your ul or tags, etc. Whatever you wanted to put. This is everything that has that class name associated with it. So everything that had a class equal side would now become a collection that would be put in here. Does that make sense? That's pretty darn powerful. If you decided that you wanted to be able to change everything while the program was running, maybe you've seen this kind of thing before. For example, this isn't a good example, but it's the one that just popped into my head, that if you were doing something for a company where you were doing some kind of an accounting program, and if they were in the black, you could make the text black. If they were in the red, meaning they were losing money, you could make the text red to show them that. And you could do it dynamically as the page was running based on something like this. All right. There's also a getElementsByName. All right. Now, it's not used as often, but you can use it also in there, and they give you an example of it on the next page. I don't think there's anything on the test for getElementsByName. I could be wrong, but I don't think there is. All right? Okay. Now, starting on the middle of page 302 and heading onward, the stuff that's here, they're starting to introduce you to Query Selector and Query Selector All. This is going to be the highlight of Chapter 12 in this book. The last chapter that we will go through. When we talk about Jquery, Jquery in many ways, it's actually been described as this. Jquery is a JavaScript library. All right, so it's JavaScript code that somebody wrote to do things that you would oftentimes do in a program. But Jquery has often been described as being JavaScript on steroids, meaning that you could do things with it that would take lines and lines and lines and lines of code in JavaScript. They claim that there's normally a 10-to-1 savings. So for every one line of JavaScript, for every 100 lines of JavaScript you'd write 10 lines of Jquery. Some books will even go as far as to say it's 100-to-1. All right, and again, you can write yourself a really cool JavaScript, just straight JavaScript, image gallery in about probably 100 lines. You can do it in Jquery if you know what you're doing in about 2 lines. So there's a big difference between those two. But JavaScript and especially Jquery take advantage of this thing called a query selector method. Again, this is page 302 in the book, and the author says right up above it, the query selector method returns the first occurrence of something that matches. First, query selector. There's also a query selector all that returns every occurrence. But if you just want the first one, you use query selector. And that's what they're showing you right here. All right. So they give you an example. They've got this here, and then on the top of page 303, it says you could reference the image element using query selector. So what does that say? That says this image must be within an H1 tag, which must be within a header tag. I'm going to say that again because it's important that you start to understand this. This right here says, I want the first image tag that's inside of an H1 tag that's inside of a header tag. All right. Again, not only is there query selector, but there's query selector all. Again, returns a collection, which means conceivably it can return many. So if I had 7 different images that were inside of different H1 tags, inside of different header tags, and I use query selector, it would find just the first one. If I use query selector all, it would find everyone. And this is a good example that they give here. All right, this would return every LI, which is which happens to exist within a UL, which happens to exist within a nav. So with the example they're giving here, we've got 3 LIs. So query selector all returns all 3. If we just used query selector on there, it would just return that one. Does that make sense? Because it's the first one that it finds. Bottom of 303 and going on to the next page. Once you create a reference to a document object, the DOM provides tools for accessing and modifying its contents. Again, I can't say that to you too many times. That's the interactivity. All right? When you do your next test, you will be changing things. You'll probably be creating a form and then changing things while the program is running based on what you do or do not input into the form. All right, that's going to be very similar again to what you'll do in the in-chapter exercises and the ones at the end of the chapter. Okay? All right, now when you want to do this, you can use 2 properties. The first one is inner HTML. We've looked at that, but just a little bit. You can use inner HTML to write things out to a web page. What you may or may not know is if you use inner HTML, it's not just text you can write. So for instance, if I wanted to write hello world, no problem. I could do that. But I could also come in, if I wanted to, and do this. So think about the word there. The word is inner HTML. So that says if I want to, I can write not just text, but also HTML. The other one that's down here is text content. This wouldn't work. That literally, instead of making that word bolded, it would type in strong right there and here. Because text content only writes text. It does not understand the concept of HTML. All right. So you might say, well, geez, then I'm always going to use inner HTML. Well, if you use inner HTML and you write your stuff and you don't put code in there, all right, you don't put code in there that will actually check things, you can get what are called security violations. Because somebody can go in and write something they shouldn't be allowed to write on a form or whatever. They mention this a little bit on the middle of page 304 in the book. The author says down there, in general, for security reasons, you should use text content instead of inner HTML. Because inner HTML, if somebody decides they're going to put in their HTML script tag and they write malicious JavaScript, all right, they might be able to actually do harm to your system. All right, accessing an element's CSS properties. Kind of important right here. Notice what we're saying. Here's an example, document.getElementById logo. So go to the screen, go to my page, find whatever we've got in there that's got an ID of logo, and make it invisible. That makes sense? Display equal none, in essence, makes something invisible. So if for some reason, maybe if you click on I don't know why, but if you click on the logo, maybe it just disappears. That would be a way you could do it. All right. This is where it's going to come in, as I mentioned to you before. Var font equal. If you were just doing it in CSS, you'd say font dash family. You can't do that here because you're doing it inside of, you're using JavaScript on it. If you put font minus family here, you're going to get an error message. You've got to run the words together and take the second word and use what's called camel casing to uppercase the next word. All right, if that confuses you, take the time to read the chapter or at least look at the stuff that's on page 305 here. All right, they do ask on the test, they say, how would you refer to the font family, all right, in JavaScript? And as long as you remember that right there, you should be okay. Accessing element attributes on the bottom part of page 305. The author says here, you can also access an element's attributes, such as its href. So what are we doing here? We're telling it to find whatever it is that's called home link. And here we're saying find more than that, all right? We want its href attribute. What's its href? You know what that is. That's where you're going to, right? This question is almost directly asked on the test, right there. All right, they will ask you how you refer to home link, or whatever it is, and how you refer to the href property. So you should know how to do that. Again, you will practice doing this in the exercises that are in this book, all right, and especially the ones in this chapter. One thing to realize, and this is under the programming concepts that are on the bottom of page 306. If you look up on the screen here, okay, right here, the document.getElementById is appearing on the right-hand side of the equal sign. Over here, it's appearing on the left-hand side of an equal sign. If it's appearing on the right-hand side of an equal sign like this, it's what's called a getter. We're grabbing its value and we're assigning it to something else. If it appears on the left-hand side of an equal sign, it means it's called a setter. So you are changing its value. This is also called an accessor. This is also called a mutator. You will hear those terms again in your 4th semester when we go over Java and the Java programming language. All right? But again, if that confuses you, take the time to read page 306 on the bottom of the page. Then on 307 and 308, they've got more stuff that you're going to be doing here as far as, you know, the examples in the class, or in the chapter rather, with this photo thing that you're working on. So you are basically programmatically creating your own image gallery in this chapter. Okay. All right. Starting on the bottom of 308, adding and removing document nodes. So let's assume that I've got a document here. And don't worry, I don't worry about the DOM or anything else, but I've got something here, 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 and here. Now I want to add something new. Where would you guess by default So this is number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. All right, where if I created a new node, by default, where would it go? Somebody can guess. Where? By 1? No. Want to guess again? No. Right there. By default, when you insert, it inserts it at the bottom. When you just try to add a node, it adds it to the bottom. Now, what if you wanted it to go between 1 and 2? Then there's something called insert before. So you can tell it exactly where you want it to go. This is the kind of thing that makes up most of the rest of this chapter that we're going to talk about. We'll go for a few more pages. We'll take a break in about 10 minutes, all right? But the author says here, you have seen that you can change an element's attribute values to alter web page content without reloading the page, all right? You may or may not have heard this term from me or from somewhere else before, but there is a term that's called AJAX. Not the detergent or anything, but it stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And if you've ever gone out to a website, the easiest example I can show you is right here. So if I go out to Google right here, all right, and I start to type in Rankin, all right, what you'll notice, well, that's not a great example, but Google Suggest will bring up a bunch of things for you. The bottom line is this. That's not a great example. Let's see if we have something else. All right. Notice what it's bringing up here. I started to type in San Antonio. All right. That's Google Suggest that does that. So as I type in more and more stuff, so in other words, when I typed in San, it didn't know. It could have been San Francisco. It could have been San Diego. It didn't know. But as soon as I put an A in there, all those other ones went away. The San Diego went away, the San Francisco went away, because they were no longer relevant. All right? And the point is, that stuff changed, and the page didn't have to be refreshed. All right? That's AJAX that makes that happen. All right? There is a chapter in here. We're not going to have enough time to go over it, but if you want to learn more about AJAX, I think it's Chapter 11 of your book. All right? We do talk about AJAX in some of the other classes. So, as it says, your plan for the photo gallery includes giving users the option to add additional images to the screen. All right, so users can, number 1, see parts of all the images in a slideshow at once, or 2, use the buttons to navigate to whatever image they want to use. In this section, you'll learn about DOM methods for creating new nodes and adding them to the DOM tree. All right, now, I just want you to hear this because this confuses people at least at times. So you'll notice here this is on page 309, and it says document.createElement. Everybody see that? All right. When I asked you before, I said if we did that, and we eventually got it right, that would go here. Just saying document.createElement does not put that here. That creates an element, but it does not add it to the document object model. So it's a two-step process. The first step is what's shown here. We're creating a brand new element. All right, we're creating it, but as of right now, it exists, for lack of better words, kind of out in purgatory. Because until we add it to the DOM, it's not part of the DOM. All right, it's just something that's out there. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on in class. So if you look, starting on page 310, 310, 311, and 312, you will do this. So you will actually come in and you will create a new element. All right? So you'll do that. Then, once we get to page 312, they start talking to you about, okay, now you've got this node. How do you attach it? That's the Appendchild. And by default, Appendchild puts it at the bottom, just like we looked at. All right? So unless told otherwise, once you create a new element, unless you tell it where to go, it goes down to the very bottom. All right? You will go through an example of that as well. All right? So they give an example in here. It says, to use this method, you specify the node you want to attach to. all right, right there, and the node to attach it up to. So what does this mean? Well, I want to go to nav list. I want to create an LI, and I want to assign it to that. They do the author does what I think is a pretty good job in here of explaining exactly in this process exactly what's happening. All right. Again, I would take the time to read it if I were you. You want another question from the test? Once you create a new element, so when you use create element, before you attach it to the DOM, so as I said, it's sort of out there in purgatory, this is on the test. What is a document fragment? And a document fragment, which is defined on the bottom of 312, is one or more nodes that are there, but they're not yet connected to a document. So they're out there, all right? They're orphan nodes, for lack of better words. They don't have a parent because they have not been literally connected to the document yet. So you will go through and you will append an image node on 313, 314, and 315. And the author not only shows you the steps, but then also shows you what your screen should look like. On 313, there's a picture of what's happening. On 314, he shows you the code, and on 315, he shows you what should happen by putting that code in. Sometimes, rather than creating a brand new node, you just want to copy an existing one. Think about this. Let's suppose for a second that I want to create an unordered list. Everybody with me? You know how to create an unordered list. And I want that unordered list to have 20 things in it, maybe 20 different colors. Okay? And I could do it where I could literally come in and do a create element 20 times. Create, append, create, append, create, append. I could keep doing that. Or I could do one. I could take that one and I could modify it by using a clone, which makes a copy, and then just change the text. So maybe I wanted red, yellow, green, blue, orange, white, etc. All right? So what they're saying in here on the middle of page 315 is it says sometimes you want to create a new node that is either identical to the one you already have or at least very similar. And you can write less code by using the clone node method. So notice, existing node.clone node, where the author says here, existing node is a reference to the node you want to clone. So they give an example right here. You've got contact. That's going to find an LI. All right? So it says this creates a new LI element and assigns it to the contact variable and then specifies a class name of main nav. And then it clones it. In other words, it's creating a copy. Quite often you'll use this if you've got an ordered list or an unordered list to sit there and be able to populate it very quickly. All right, you'll do it in a lot less code. If you put that into a loop, you'll write a lot less code than if you were constantly creating the new nodes and then appending them. So again, the process, what's happening here, the author shows you again on the top of page 316. It's not, a super, well done as far as what it's showing you, but ideally at least, you look at it and it'll make at least some sense to you. All right? So again, you will go through another example of this yourselves starting on the bottom of page 316. And on 316, 317, 318, 319 to 320, you will be going in and doing a clone operation. All right? Now, I don't know because I don't watch you when you're doing your homework, but my guess is at least some of you are like, yeah, type in this, yeah, type in this, yeah, type in this. And you're not exactly understanding or thinking about what you're doing. When you do the test, when you do your next test, you are going to have to be actually adding things to your web page dynamically as the page is running. Does that make sense to everybody? So it's worth your while to not only do the exercise, but kind of think about what you're doing as you're doing it. Now again, not to be funny, because this isn't funny, I can say that till I'm blue in the face. And some of you will listen to what I'm saying, and you'll be, yeah, that sort of makes sense. But other people will just, whatever, I just want to get this done. I hate this garbage, and I just want to do it. Well, then you might struggle when we take the test. All right. I mentioned before that if you want to put a node in at a specific place, you use this insert before. And notice it's got here existing child node. That means put it right before that one. So if I did an insert node and I put 2 in there, then number 2 would become number 3, and this new one that I'm putting in would become number 2. Does that make sense? So if you want control over where something is placed in the DOM, you use the insert before. And again, you will go through and you will do this on pages 322 and 323. And again, the author shows you exactly what it is you're going to be doing here. All right? Shows you the before picture, okay, and kind of shows you the after picture here on page 323 down near the bottom of the page. So we talked about how to add a new node, in a specified place. Well, not only do you occasionally want to add nodes, sometimes you want to remove them. All right? So there is a remove child, Appendchild to add, remove child to get rid of. All right? So as it says, in addition to creating and attaching nodes, all right, you can remove nodes from the DOM tree. Why would you ever want to remove a node from the DOM tree? Maybe as an example, and again, these, when I give you these, they're just popping into my head. So maybe it's a good example, maybe it's not. But imagine for a second we were a 4-year instead of a 2-year college. And if you were a junior or a senior, you were an upperclassman. And if you were a freshman or a sophomore, you were a lowerclassman. Bless you. Everybody get that? So I would ask you your year, okay? And Tony puts 2 in for his year. He's a sophomore. Well, then anything that's down below it that was for upperclassmen, I can have that be removed because he's not an upperclassman. I could remove that dynamically, all right, using remove child, just as an example. And you will be using remove child on page 324, 325, and 326. All right. Before we go on, we're up to manipulating the browser with the window object. So we pretty much have talked to death, so to speak, in this chapter, talking about the document object. But now we're going to talk about the window object. Then we're going to talk about the browser object, the history object, and the location object. We've actually finished the majority of this chapter. But let's take a break. Let's come back. Let's make it about 9:12, please, and we'll pick it up. We'll finish the chapter at that time.